with Alan Juddy, and this is another episode of Seed Dating, the podcast where you get to meet one of Agricom's products, learn about its attributes, and match it to your own farm system. And here to nurture this new blossoming relationship is our very own forage relationship expert, Alistair Moorhead. Hi, Al, and who are we going to meet today?
Hi, Juddy. Today we're going to meet the latest white clover in our stable, Emblem.
Wow, Emblem.
Emblem.
Well, first of all, Al, can you take me through and tell me a little bit about white clover, very briefly?
Oh, and it's probably a good place to start because white clover is a very iconic legume for temperate landscapes and temperate fertile landscapes.
Yeah.
And it is an absolute match for temperate perennial ryegrass, same fertility regime, same landscape uses. So ryegrass and white clover are two species that New Zealand has managed to bring together very well. And why your point is so valid is that, white clover has this huge plasticity between wet landscapes and productive landscapes. But then it comes down into this environment that can be more stressful, more on the edge of its ecological range, which is medium to lower fertility and periods, and if not extended periods of dry conditions. And in this zone, it really is the edge of where white clover really thrives. And that is where we are with the Emblem, on the edge.
Yeah. So give me a perspective of the spectrum of white clovers and what makes, we talk about small leaves and large leaves and grazing types, set stocking types and rotational grazing types. Give me a feel for the differences in those plants.
Look, I think in the real basic relationship perspective, just linking it to something that you could probably feel quite easily is that, the more grass you're capable of growing, the more likely you are to need a more aggressive, taller, and more present white clover in the top of a pasture. And as you come down through your productive ranges and maybe the grazing systems from rotational grazing where you have high covers, where you really require something to compete in high covers, to something that you're wanting to be present under more extensive grazing where you may now be relating to sheep grazing and low covers. And in that world, you are also looking for a different style. And so you get bigger plants that compete in bigger pasture, and you get smaller and hardier and denser plants that compete in shorter pasture. And I think that's probably the gradient that we're discussing here today, and sort of white clover can stretch across that gradient. They can both do bits and pieces of both, but the big types don't last long at the lower residuals and the tougher edges of that ecological range. And you tend to find the small types genuinely require more light and more openness to actually be competitive at the higher production end of that end. And a little bit about whether you have enough summer moisture to maintain pasture cover. If you have long periods of open, dry conditions, there's a little bit of overlap. But in real terms, the Emblem category we're going to discuss today sits at the more intensive grazing environment.
Yeah, I was just going to ask Emblem, so on that spectrum. So describe for me now Emblem in terms of that.
One last little tiny description, literally, of where these clovers fit. If you're looking at a big large leaf clover, for example, it's where you're throwing a tennis ball or a baseball out into your paddock and you never see it again.
Yep. Okay. Big covers.
Yeah. Big covers, high residuals, and that's where the bigger leaf types are. The intermediate, medium to large, we fondly call that category, is where for some farming systems they may be dry in summer, therefore they might have between 1 and 3 months of dry in productive landscapes. Yep. And in that world, this category is highly plastic and can be very competitive, but remembering that basically means for 9 months of the year, the pastures are tall and really aggressive, particularly through the winter. And again, shorter types, that's not their friend. They can do it, but it's not easy because you're fighting for light and for 9 months of the year. And then, and I would describe that model as very tolerant to seeing a golf ball in a paddock in spring, for example, for say 1.5, 2 months of the year. Then you come to this medium to small category, and I think the best analogy I could give is if you can find a golf ball in your pasture for between 2 to 4 months of the year, this is the category for you. So whether that's summer or whether that's early spring, it doesn't matter. But if you can find your golf balls quite regularly in a paddock, this category of Emblem is very much for you.
Okay, so you're down that end. Tell me a little bit about the grazing management that might suit, for example.
Look, without doubt, rotational grazing with sheep is an absolute sweet spot for this type. It is still designed to be a productive and deliver under productive grazing management, which is rotational grazing. And in the case of particularly sheep and to a degree beef farms, that rotation could be like a 5-day small scale set stocking and then moving on. So that's, the less intensive rotational grazing of the sheep and beef industry. It really does suit that. I think it does have a place for dryland dairy, but we are talking more extensive dryland dairy. And some of our listeners from Australia, there is definitely large tracts of Australian dryland dairy where this type of clover is quite useful for, because you are quite dry for a prolonged period of time, and ground cover in hot conditions is really important. This type of clover holds the ground well. So that's a sort of model, but where it excels is periods of set stocking, and that's where animals might be on for three weeks, might be on for 60 days at a time. So at that moment, this sort of clover shines.
So when you say on, you're saying they've got access to...
They don't leave the paddock, mate.
Yeah, they don't leave the paddock. Yeah. They've got access to it.
Water. Yeah,
it's not necessarily set stocking, which can be for long periods. But what you're saying is
the one I just described is set stocking.
Is
like
relatively
60 days on one paddock is set stocking.
Yes, but I guess what you might say is I'm on a slow rotation. They're in there for 2 weeks.
Yeah. Again,
this is something that would probably excel under that regime as well.
Correct. Yeah, but also true set stocking, which is the 60 days.
Yep. And what are the I'm thinking about stole-on density here. What are the things that lend that to being far more successful under that relative to?
So now we are talking about Emblem.
Yep, we're talking about Emblem.
What it is. Okay, so this style is really designed to have highly branching stole-ons that are very, very fine. So again, I'll use our Australian colleagues as a really great example. Is like merino wethers wake up every day to try to work out how to lick feed off the ground.
Yep.
And literally they will be trying to chisel out right down to bare earth 9 times out of 10 for months on end.
Great description, by the way.
And I'm using that as the most extreme example of what we're trying to say. And this is the type of white clover that will probably still be killed in some of those situations, knowing the sheer temperatures and the sheer drought of so many of those landscapes. But this is the type of clover that is designed to hold the ground when something's trying to pulling its stole-ons off the ground to use them as food. Yep. And so they are finer, they have a smaller diameter, they are highly branched, and in every node on a stole-on they root at the ground and they tie them and they connect to the ground really aggressively, which just keeps them connected when actually a stole-on is food for other animals. So the large types, again, you tend to find they are quite large diameter. They can be grabbed hold of with their big leaves. You can pull up the ends of the stole-ons, and quite regularly you'll see a cow or a stock class actually eating the ends of stole-ons of these plants. And now if that sheep or a wether got into it, the wether would literally chew those stole-ons into the ground because they are far enough off the ground for them to actually get them. So it's designed to hold the ground.
And actually the point about that, I guess, is that those stole-ons are very much storage organs for the energy for that plant.
Oh, absolutely. And more importantly, they're the perenniality component. Like white clover has two perenniality components. We often talk about the vegetative survival, of which stole-ons are the vegetative perennial trait, and Emblem is exceptional for its perennial trait, persistence of yield over time. And that is these stole-ons moving through your pasture, seeking space. They're all turn into clonal branchlets for time because they all break off. So they're all out there by themselves and creating new plants on a regular basis. The taproot of white clover lasts about 18 months and then uniformly dies, regardless of type, which means that the vegetative survival of white clover and Emblem is based on stole-on propensity to survive summer, winter, set stocking, long-term shading, all of these things, and Emblem does that. However, white clover also has a flowering trait. And so white clover has a more annual survival trait, which is setting large amounts of that beautiful golden seed, which sits in the ground for years upon years. And so white clover has that trait. And for me, for Emblem, the landscapes that will be used in and can be used in really successfully, it's a great investment for anyone introducing it to high country, hill country developments, broadcast programs in the years we can afford to put fertilizer on and broadcasting wide on. This is the place not to really skimp on quality, because it's your one chance to put genetics into those landscapes that are going to provide an increased genetic gain in those landscapes. Because in nature, what happens is when bees start pollinating, they are pollinating with all the ecotypes and all the wild types that are in the landscape. Now, these are okay, but in the case of white clover, they get smaller and smaller and less productive because they are the survival types. All the big types are chewed out and eaten out over time. And so the moment bees start pollinating between flowers of what you've just sown and flowers of what's there, your clover gets smaller and smaller very fast.
Over generations.
Generations. So I describe Emblem from a choice, from my perspective, is that I chose a plant that had a slightly larger leaf for its category. It fits in the medium to small category because the plasticity of getting small is quite high. But I did want something with a large enough leaf that it's well above what the natural clover is in your landscape. So when you invest in putting it into your landscape, you are putting in something that you can visually see the productivity of, and it will take many generations for that to slowly revert to the natural clover that you see.
One question for you, and this is around the use of Emblem in a pasture mix. Would you ever consider putting another type of clover with a larger leaf with it, or do you think that let's say if we're going into a sheep operation, that Emblem's got enough stretch that it could do both jobs? What's your view on that?
That's a really good question, and I think the respecting our plant breeders and what they're delivering, more and more the description would be that, particularly in the medium to large category and Emblem's category, these are almost standalone clovers. They are not necessarily the need to have them in mixes. The large leaf category, I think there's always a role for putting in a medium large in, or even a medium if you're particularly dry. And again, I used the eastern seaboard dairy zone of Australia. Putting a large leaf in and maybe a medium leaf in would be a very good practice for how long those paddocks can stay brown and dry, and how fast a medium leaf can recover on that phase, because it's all about the recovery. But to answer your question, I would describe the medium to large category as the most flexible to be used in both tall grass and short grass. And but with Emblem, I believe with sheep and sheep country, particularly high country, but definitely sheep-based pastures, this is a standalone opportunity, but it matches extremely well with our other flagship product, Attribute, and in a mixture of Attribute and Emblem and more rotational grazing and productive systems. That is a match. That is an absolute match for resilience of white clover and productivity and persistence for white clover in the modern age.
And so if you were giving me an elevator pitch, Emblem, white clover, give me the key features of that.
Resilience and persistence over time, a real stretch into the edge of white clover country, and recognizing that although the vegetative survival of these plants is a paramount scenario for modern genetic gain and modern productivity, and I didn't really mention it, but we focus very heavily on seed production of our modern genetics, and that is a trait that gets expressed on farm as well. So although we value white clover from a perenniality and vegetative survival and performance perspective, of which Emblem is awesome in the right grazing systems, you can't ignore the fact that we're also breeding for elite seed production, and the reality is that converts on farm to good white clover seed loadings as well. So the double strategy for stressful landscapes is excellence and persistence over time, which Emblem really typifies, and also matched with excellent seed production gives them the secondary trait for perenniality, which is big seed loadings over time of white clover.
Oh, well, I can see that Emblem white clover might be a really good addition to a pasture that may be going into, dryland sheep situations. So I can see that from a animal systems point of view. And so the fact that I'm identifying today as a sheep farmer on hard hills, I think I'm going to swipe right for Emblem white clover. It seems like the right clover for the right job. So you've been listening to another episode of Seed Dating with Al and Juddy. Hope you can catch another episode real soon.